how important is the right to vote? For those who do not have it, that right can seem as important as life itself. Indeed, in the Deep South of the 1960s, civil rights workers suffered arrest, beatings, shocks with electric cattle prods, even death, all in the name of the right to vote. Their efforts inspired the nation and led to a large-scale federal effort to secure suffrage for African Americans and other minority groups in the United States. Tonight we're going to start talking about suffrage and civil rights. We're going to talk about what leads up to the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and then tomorrow night we will look at the big Civil Rights Act that went into effect that changed voting for everybody in the United States. Just to go back over it, here is the 15th Amendment. It was ratified in 1870, 5 years after the end of the Civil War. It is the right to vote cannot be denied to any citizen of the United States because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So basically it was meant to ensure that African American men could vote. So this is giving African American men who used to be previously slaves the right to vote, and it is now law within the Constitution. Before that, African Americans were systematically kept out of polling places in the South. A lot of times violence was used, threats against families, social pressures. They would deny families or people the right to use credit in stores to get things that they may need. Literacy tests, poll taxes, white primaries, meaning the only way that you could vote is if you were a member of the party, and by being a member of the party, you had to be white, and the political party that was doing this at that time were the Democrats. And the last way that African Americans were kept out of the polling places in the South is called gerrymandering, which is the practice of drawing election district lines in order to limit the voting strength of a particular party. This was most prominent in the South in Tuskegee, Alabama. Tuskegee redrew their voting district lines. If you look, the square, the entire box of the picture that is there is Tuskegee, Alabama. That was one voting district at one point. They went back through and redrew the voting lines differently so that it excluded the African Americans from voting within the white district. So people in Alabama were making sure, they were ensuring that African Americans would not be able to vote in those elections by drawing them outside those lines for the city to make any kind of changes within the city there in Tuskegee or the Deep South. So the first major Civil Rights Act that goes into place is the Civil Rights Act of 1957. It's the first law passed by Congress to implement the 15th Amendment, and it was set up through the Civil Rights Commission, and one of the commission's major duties was to inquire into claims of voter discrimination. The commission's report would report its findings to Congress and the president, and then through the media to the public. The act also gave the Attorney General the power to seek federal court orders to prevent interference with any person's right to vote in any federal election. So we now have a system going into place to try and curb some of the discrimination that is happening throughout the United States, most commonly in the Deep South. In addition to the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1960 was added as an additional safeguard to make sure that these laws were actually being pushed through and followed through and taken care of. So the Civil Rights Act of 1960 provided for the appointment of federal voting referees, and these officers were to serve anywhere a federal court found voter discrimination. They were given the power to help qualify persons to register and vote in federal elections. So these guys are there to help everybody make sure they can register to vote, that they're not being kept from registering to vote. Basically, they're being a referee in the voting arena at that time. So the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960 are effective, but not nearly effective enough. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is going to be implemented. It's a much broader and more effective law than either of the two measures that have already been put into place. It's going to outlaw discrimination in several areas, especially in job-related matters. So in regards to voting rights, its important section forbids the use of any voter registration or literacy requirements in an unfair or discriminatory manner. So they're getting rid of these registrations blockages that they're putting up towards African Americans and trying to knock those down so that they can register to vote. The 1964 law continued a pattern set in the earlier laws, so it relied on judicial action to overcome the racial barriers and emphasized the use of federal court orders called injunctions. I've given you the definition for an injunction, which is a court order that either forces or restrains the performance of some act by a private individual or a public official. The violation of an injunction would amount to a contempt of court, and it's a crime punishable by fine or imprisonment. So, go back over to Class Jump, and I need you to answer the question, why do you think the South went to such lengths to control or prohibit African Americans from voting? You can respond to the question, or you may respond to somebody else's.